right, we got some people coming in.
Yeah, people know the drill. They're already announcing.
I know.
From.
I clearly wasn't precise enough in my language. Since we were doing the where, I should have said what company, but you know, good lesson learned right here.
Well, both are interesting.
All right, give folks another couple minutes here.
Could see Marlon on here, old friend from CV.
Let's see. Hey, Tammy, Halifax, Nova Scotia. Okay. Give folks another minute, maybe, Matt.
Yeah, maybe just another few seconds, minute. Usually get some stragglers coming in late.
I mean, some of us on the East Coast are just finishing up our lunch.
All right.
Should we do it?
Yeah, let's get it rolling.
All right. So good morning, official good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Special shout out for Veterans Day. Thank you to all who have served. I'm glad everyone could join us today. I think most of you know, but my name is Scott Rothman. I'm a market director here with Challenger's Effortless Experience Business. And here with us, obviously, is Matt Dixon, Chief Research and Innovation Officer at Tether, and of course, author of the book, The Effortless Experience. Matt, how's it going today?
Going well. Yeah, I'm back in the DC area.
All right.
So excited to be here for I think session 3. So we're
session 3.
Officially halfway through, right?
That is right. That is right. Session 3 is, of course, covering chapter 3. The worst question a service rep can ask. This chapter is actually one of my favorites in the book. I was telling Matt a second ago, I said, I really like this one. I said, not that I don't like the rest of the book, but this is one of my favorite chapters in the book. I think there's a lot of insight uncovered. We're going to talk about a lot of it, whether that's first contact resolution, next issue avoidance, you name it. A couple of quick administrative items. We are off for the next 2 weeks. So we will regroup in early December. We're off next week. Matt has a speaking gig, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, with TELUS. That is open to everyone. So if you'd like to join, you can absolutely do that. And then the following week here in the States, it's the Thanksgiving holiday. So again, we are off the next 2 weeks. We'll pick back up again on December 2nd. And don't fret, we'll be here, December 2nd will be here before you know it.
Yeah.
For those of you that are joining us for the first time, this book club is a little bit different than most, just simply because we've got a number of folks on the line. It's a little difficult to open up the lines and ask discussion questions and have a conversation, but we do want this to be interactive. So we're going to handle questions and answers through the Q&A. So throughout, as you've got questions, please put them in there. We'll do our best to address them during the rest of the conversation. I've got a few questions that I'll add into the chat as well. And then, of course, like we've done the last couple of weeks, please feel free to chime in with your thoughts when anybody asks a question. And I'll continue to mention this throughout our time together. If you the long-running joke, if you enjoy our time together, he is Matt Dixon. I'm Scott Rothman. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues. If you're active on social media, please post on LinkedIn, tag us. And again, if you don't like book club, we aren't Matt and we aren't Scott. Matt, we're gonna have to come up with some names or something like that.
I know. So you could blame it on Caitlin Jordan and my colleague.
There we go.
So
there we go.
One place where I thought it'd be good to start off, Scott, I had a couple of folks reach out to me on LinkedIn with some questions from last session that I think they didn't. It was sort of things that occurred to people afterward. And last time we talked about channel stickiness, so we were talking all about digital and self-service, and as I talked about last time, and we had a good conversation about how that really, if we look back and the book came out in 2013, if we were to rewrite the book, that would be one of those chapters that I think would have changed quite a bit in terms of what we're finding. I mean, in part just because of the time and how fast digital changes, but also because of COVID really kind of shooting some of these digital preferences through a tunnel of time, maybe faster than any of us really expected from the practitioner point of view. I think the question that came to me through LinkedIn from one of our book club participants was about how do we assess or understand whether, because I think they were interested in this idea of, a lot of customers are going to our website first and then they're calling, but we don't even know it. And so how do we figure that out?
Yep.
And, that was something we didn't really talk about last time. So maybe we could hit on that quickly here, Scott.
Sure.
I'd say, like a lot of things, there's sort of a low tech way and a high tech way to do it. The low tech way, Scott, you may have mentioned the Fidelity case last time.
Very briefly.
I really like that tactic. It's low tech, but really basically what you're doing is you're asking customers when they call in if they went to the digital property, the app or the website. And what's interesting, we learned this from Fidelity when we did the research. It's really important that if you're going to have your frontline reps ask customers, hey, did you wondering if you went to the website first, you got to do it from a learning perspective, right? There's a danger that could come across as accusatory, like, hey, dummy, did you know you could solve this online? And did you do that before you called me? And we don't want our customers to feel that way, of course. And so what we're trying to do is use this as a learning opportunity. And so what Fidelity would do is have their reps talk about it. Hey, we every so often we do just a little bit of Q&A with our customers to try to understand their preferences and their experience with Fidelity broadly. And so do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions before I'm going to solve your problem, of course, but do you have just 10 seconds? I'd love to ask you, first, did you try another resource before you called the call center? What was your experience like? Things like that. And it sets it off as sort of a separate part of the conversation. Hey, what I want to do is understand, where'd you go first and what was your experience doing it? And when the customer, you guys remember this from the book, when they said, yeah, I went, but I couldn't find what I was looking for. Oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me more? Did you get an error message? Were you confused by what you found? Could you not find it at all? Did you find conflicting information? Tell me, because we're collecting this information and I'm going to get it back to the web folks. So, customers like yourself don't have this problem, because the last thing we want is for you to go to a channel you prefer to be in and then have to feel like you then have to call. Customers appreciate that. And the other piece is, if the customer says, nah, actually, I just picked up the phone and called, or I went to your website and just, use it as a phone book to find your phone number. That's an opportunity to say, hey, let's solve your problem. But if you'd like, if you got another minute or so at the end of the call, I'd be happy to take you to fidelity.com and show you how to do this. Super easy. And, I know you got other stuff to do. I'm sure, you'd love to talk to me, but you got other things to do, and I'd love to make it easy for you. So, that becomes an opportunity to teach the customer how to fish, if you will, versus just giving them the fish. So you got to be careful in how you do it, but it's a low tech way to solve it. Now, the other thing I would mention is, again, one of those things that's changed quite a bit since we wrote the book, but using AI and machine learning can really help us figure out those repeat contacts. Sorry, not repeat contacts, but help us figure out channel switching. We'll talk about repeat contacts here in this upcoming pillar, next issue avoidance. But it can also help us figure out the channel switching. I didn't mention this last time, but so many of us I see there are a lot of big companies here on Book Club today. A lot of us are recording calls, right, for quality assurance and training purposes, right? We record our calls, we record our chats. Did you ever think about using that data to try to understand what the digital experience was? And what I mean specifically is, go in there and try to listen for those things that customers complain about, because you won't surprise any of us to know, and we see this all the time at Tether. We go look at recorded phone conversations, we get a really good picture of what the digital experience was like before the customer called, because it ends up being the first thing they complain about. Hey, I'm glad I got a hold of you. I got to tell you, I spent an hour on your website, couldn't find what I was looking for, got an error message, couldn't execute a pretty simple transaction. Like, you guys need to improve things. And so customers will speak their mind, right? They'll talk about our products, they'll talk about our stores, talk about our pricing, our competitors, our websites. And so these recorded conversations are really a gold mine to try to understand what happened before the customer picked up the phone to call. So I just, thank you again for the question that came in through LinkedIn. And I'd encourage everyone, if there are questions that come up after this session, then by all means, hit myself or Scott up. on LinkedIn with those questions. There can be things that occur to you, I think, after the discussion, and I'd love to keep the dialogue going. And like I said, if there's a good question that I think everyone will benefit from, we'll tee it up for next time. Just like that question we addressed just a moment ago. So with that, I guess, Scott, you teed me up and then I kind of swung and missed at the ball, but I think what you were saying is
let me try it again.
Yeah, the worst.
Better. So really quickly before I do that, just in case anybody does have the book with them, the case, the low tech case from Fidelity's on page 50 of the book. Definitely one of my favorite practices for sure. But to tee up our conversation moving forward, speaking of LinkedIn, you posted on LinkedIn, hey, what's the worst question a service rep can ask? And it's the title of this chapter. So I think we just start there, right? Like, tell us a little bit more about the worst question a service rep can ask.
Yeah, by the way, can I just say, so it's going to be swing and miss number 2, Scott. I will take the bait and I will address that comment. But
well, Matt, you just cut out. Did you put
Brett
yourself
had
on
a great
mute?
comment here just on the chat. The other,
okay.
Yeah, am I back? Okay.
You're back.
Good, perfect. Good to be back. Actually, I'm gonna minimize here. Let me just double check. I'm sorry, guys. Let me double check here. Make sure I am on hardwired connection. So I should be good. Okay. Brett had a great comment about what falls flat in that learning exercise is when an agent asks the question when the online resources are what directed them to the agent in the first place. By the way, Brett, the other thing I would say very frustrating to customers is when we send them communications, a notice in the mail, please contact us, an SMS, whatever it is. And the first question the rep has is, oh, how can I help you today? It's like, I don't know, you called me, like you contacted me. So let's start there. And then it's, we did, what was the thing you got? And that's very frustrating. So anyway, let's talk now about the worst question a rep can ask. So this is a bit tongue in cheek, but we'll go here. I always ask this. Some of you guys may have seen my co-author on the Challenger sale and the Challenger customer, Brett Adamson, said cheekily on LinkedIn, what are you wearing today? That seems like the worst question that a service rep could ask. And indeed, that actually somebody did mention that. I used to do this when I presented as like, hey, just shout it out. What do you think the worst question is? And then people started saying stuff like that, and it got a little dicey. So we stopped doing that. And I will tell you the one time I see we had somebody from Neiman Marcus on here. So I remember somebody did say that. And I remember the person a number of years ago who ran contact centers for J. Crew turned around and said, that's a great question to ask. We have all of our ask the question. So, so anyway, or what they call them, style consultants. So anyway, the worst question a rep can ask, I would submit, is the following. And you'll know this from having read your homework in the book. Have I fully resolved your issue today? And it's bad for 2 reasons. The first reason I think is that it sends the customer the, hurry up offense message. Are we done here? Can I get on to the next call in my queue? So that's bad, but that's not the real reason it's the worst question. I think the real reason it's the worst question is it doesn't do what it's designed to do. So we in contact centers and customer service, we ask this question of our customers so that we can assess our first contact resolution rate. And of course, we know first contact resolution is something that's very, very important in customer service. It's important for quality purposes. We know it's a big driver of effort. We talked about that in the first session. We also know it's a huge driver of cost, repeat contacts. And so what we want to do is make sure that we are not putting a bow on this issue, on this problem, on this interaction until we solve that issue, because we don't want the customer to have to call back. And so the way we get after that is first contact resolution. To measure that, we have our representatives ask questions like this or variations of it, like, is there anything else I can help you with? Stuff like that. And the reason it fails there is because when you go out and study it with companies and with customers, what you find is that companies tend to give themselves a pat on the back. They think they do a pretty good job with first contact resolution about 3/4 of the time. They believe they successfully achieve that one and done service ideal, first contact resolution. When we went out and surveyed the customers from those very same companies, they said, not so fast. Customers see it very differently. They say only about 40% issues in their experience were resolved in one contact. So, there's obviously a disconnect here, and there's it's a definitional disconnect perhaps, or a perspective kind of disconnect, but customers obviously are thinking about either what is an issue differently than companies do, or they're thinking about what does resolved really mean, and they define that differently, and maybe both. And so I remember when we were heading down this path, just to take a trip down memory lane, and those of you who were CEB members or still working with Gartner will know they put out, we used to put out a couple of big signature studies. Scott and I used to work on these things till late in the evenings and over the weekends, these kinds of things, getting these ready to share with our members. And one year we did a study on issue resolution, and it was, I gotta be honest, it was kind of a confounding study, because most companies had already delivered, in their estimation, pretty high issue resolution rates, or first contact resolution rates. And so it was a little bit like, how do we squeeze more, blood from the stone? How do we get higher performance? But we'd already reached pretty high levels, at least 70% in most cases. Some companies telling us they were in the 80 to 90% range. And so really tough to produce some groundbreaking insight for how you're going to close that last 10% of issue resolution. And so we were wrestling with this for a while. And I think what occurred to us was the better question for the study wasn't, how do we get better at first contact resolution? The better question, the one we really should pursue, is a totally different question, which is, why do our customers call us back in the first place? So share with you just a couple of things here. I'm gonna pause for a moment after I go through this slide. Scott, I'll pull you in and get your thoughts on first contact resolution and so on and so forth. And by the way, I know there'll be questions around measurement. We talk about that in the chapter, and we'll talk about that here as well. That has also changed a bit, and we can modernize our perspective on how to understand repeat contacts and so on and so forth. And I do want to share my Dyson vacuum cleaner story, because that's a goodie. So we'll save that. I'll save that here for just a moment. But we wrote a study instead, not on how do we get better at first contact resolution, because again, not a lot of daylight to close there, not a big gap to close for most companies. Instead, we wrote a study on why customers call back, and it turns out we found something really surprising, and it was this: that callbacks fall into two different categories. Explicit issue failures and implicit issue failures. And I think this is one of those cases where we kind of couldn't help ourselves. We came up with fancy names for what are frankly pretty straightforward concepts. Explicit issue failures, literally, you didn't solve the problem the customer called you about. Now, that happens for many reasons. It happens for reasons of human error. It may be the representative didn't totally understand, misheard the customer, thought it was a different issue, didn't actually solve the issue the customer really had. It may be because it's a new agent, right? They're not fully down the learning curve. Maybe they were trained on that topic in their 10 weeks of training, but they forgot the answer, and they didn't want to embarrass themselves by raising their hand and saying, hey, I was kind of dozing off during that part of training, so can you kind of help me out and flag down a coach or a supervisor to help me out with this call? And so they either sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly give the wrong answer. By the way, it also happens for systems issues. This happens from time to time still, even as most of us kind of approach 5 nines uptime with many of our key systems. From time to time, you'll call in and the reservation system is down, or some key system is being rebooted, and it won't be online for another 15, 20 minutes. And so the representative asks the customer to call back. So that's kind of the straightforward stuff, right? We literally got an issue, didn't solve it. That's part of the reason customers call back. The other source of callbacks that you see on the right-hand side, these we call implicit issue failures. Now, what is an implicit issue failure? An implicit issue failure is not that you didn't solve the issue the customer called about. It's that they call back for some reason related to the reason they originally called. Now, when we break that out, and we're going to talk about the first type of implicit issue failure, which we call downstream issues, or in the book, I think we call it adjacent issues, sort of issues that exist right next to the issue the customer called in about. We're going to talk about those today. The second flavor of implicit issue failures are kind of what I call experiential disconnects with the representative. That we're going to talk about 2 weeks from now, where we talk about experience engineering, because that's all about disconnects that happen between the rep and the customer. And by the way, we know this happens a lot, right? Your customer doesn't really understand what the rep is trying to tell them. They're a bit confused. Maybe they don't like what they're being told. And for a number of reasons, they will call back and they will agent shop and they'll try to find somebody else, somebody who will give them that policy or refund, it's out of warranty service, like Scott, right? Somebody's going to take pity on them, or they'll call back to try to just find somebody who kind of can communicate what the issue is in a way the customer can understand, because they're not getting it. And so this happens a lot. The other type I mentioned, these downstream issues, adjacent issues, happen frequently as well. Let me just show you the breakout here, and we're gonna talk a lot about these downstream issues, how to think about them, and how to resolve them. And I'll call on my Dyson example here, but I'm gonna go to Scott here in a moment. But before I do, let me just show you that this was the big surprise to us, and this was the big head snapper in the study. Was, look, we in customer service are all about first contact resolution. Just drive that rate higher and higher and higher, and that comes down to like stopping the failure rate when the customer calls in with an issue and we don't solve it, because it does happen, right? And as you see, it drives 54% of callbacks are because the rep did not answer the customer's question. They didn't resolve the customer's issue, so they call back. But 46% of the time, which is almost half, customers call back for some other reason. And in that case, imagine we ask the customer, did we fully resolve your issue today? And the customer says yes, but then they end up calling back anyway. And in their mind, they're thinking, no, you didn't really resolve it, and there's something else going on. And oftentimes it's those downstream issues, which again, we'll talk about here. But this was where we found the low-hanging fruit. We didn't think there was a lot of opportunity for companies to get better at first contact resolution, because most companies are pretty good at that. But we do think there's an opportunity to reduce callbacks. And the biggest opportunity here is those implicit issue failures, because when you ask companies, how are you trying to get better at issue resolution? Every company goes to better coaching, better training, better processes, systems that stay up, 5 nines of the time. Those are all good things to do, because there's a lot of callbacks that come from explicit issue failures, but nobody's really focused on these other callback drivers. We're ignoring almost half of the population of callbacks. And so that was the big takeaway from that study that year. And that's what the whole idea of next issue avoidance is about, which I'll share with you in a moment, this idea of how do we think about these downstream issues with my Dyson example. But Scott, let me pull you in here. Your thoughts on, you're out there in the market, you're talking to practitioners all the time. What's the state of first contact resolution? Like, where does it rank in the stuff that service leaders care about? How are they thinking about it? Are people thinking about it in this way, or are they still thinking about it in that kind of, nope, just get better at those explicit issue resolution rates?
There's a few different thoughts that I have. And by the way, there's a good comment from Brett in there, which I think is timely given some of the supply chain issues that are going on in the market. And for those of you following along the books, right, we're somewhere in 72 to 76 page range. I'm not sure if I'm talking coherently at the moment. But there are a few things, right? And when I think about my conversations, the percentages that we talked about on the previous page, right, where we think we are from a first contact resolution versus where customers view it, there tend to be two views, and it's kind of the opposite. It is opposite ends of the spectrum. To be honest, there are a lot of people who don't necessarily know what their percentage is. And then the other end of the spectrum is, I think we're somewhere in that 70%. And then you bring up the 40% and they go, no, I don't think that's quite true. And then I say, well, let me ask you something. As a consumer, your last high effort experience, what did that look like? And do you think that organization would have considered that first contact resolution or not? And then you start to see the wheels turning a bit when they put themselves in the shoes of customers. But it did kind of slightly tangential to this. It did make me think of something else, which is, I mentioned early on, this is one of my favorite chapters. But I do get into conversations with people where they disagree a bit. And I just be curious. I'm going to pose a question here in the chat, which is just simply, what's something in chapter 3 that you don't fully agree with? I don't know if anyone will have any strong opinions or not, but certainly curious. But then when I think about this specific example as well, I do tend to find it's tough for organizations to think about that implicit issue, right? It's tough, I find, for folks to get their sort of heads wrapped around it. The explicit is just direct. It's, hey, I've got this problem. Could you help me with X? Could you help me with Y? I want to talk to your manager, and so on. That's straightforward. That's obvious. There's a recognition that the implicit exists, just maybe a lack of understanding how to tackle it. Yeah. And I think there's two challenges here. One is what you've just described with the implicit failures. The other one is something I referenced very quickly during our last conversation, some of the research we did, which basically said, hey, look, when it comes to explicit failures, we do a pretty good job of solving them and capturing them. But when it comes to the implicit, not only is it tough to do something about it, how do you then, what's the feedback loop, right? So I'm calling and I'm saying, hey, Matt, just got set up with, my new online account. Everything's great, but X. And you go, well, I'm happy to help you with X. And then I just sort of say, you know what also stinks? Like, I really wish you guys would do Y as well. There's really no mechanism to not only capture Y, but then kind of route it back for some improvement opportunities and so on. So that's a bit tangential to this chapter in this conversation, but it's something I wanted to mention given some of the research we had done.
I'll tell you one I hear a lot, and we'll go to this idea of next issue avoidance here in just a second, but one I hear a lot is the measurement question. So I think, in the book we talk about shifting our focus. So if we know that, so let's start with, what we learned in the first chapter, right? And we talked about in the first meeting of book club, which is repeat contacts are a big driver of customer effort. In fact, I'll tell you, statistically, they're the biggest driver of customer effort. So it is the 800-pound gorilla in the, I know that's probably changed as digital preferences have changed and customers expect more of digital channels, et cetera. I think channel switching is probably creeping up there, but repeat contacts is still the doozy that we've got to get our arms around from an effort reduction standpoint. If we know that's an issue, is it, and then that there are lots of things that drive callbacks, not just whether you solve the issue, but other things related to the issue you solved. Agent disconnects that we're going to talk about in the next session, but also downstream issues that maybe you could have gotten ahead of. If you knew that, then wouldn't the better way to be measuring issue resolution from a customer perspective not be to actually measure first contact resolution and the response to that question we proposed, but instead to measure callbacks? And I think that the pushback I tend to get on that is the primary pushback. I think the underlying pushback is measuring callbacks is not a beauty contest. So it's nobody wins. And first contact resolution is, right? It gives us numbers we can be proud of, high resolution rates, et cetera. But when those numbers don't correspond to reductions in call volume as we get better at that, or we have a hard time explaining why we're still seeing a lot of repeat contacts, even though our claimed first contact resolution rate is really high, those become uncomfortable conversations with the CFO or with other executives around the management table. And I think the customer-centric way to measure it is by looking at callbacks. Now, I think the second pushback I get on that is, but a lot of times customers call back for things that are not the agent's fault. Chrissy had a great example here about price matching, which I will tell you, I know my mom is the world's biggest price matcher. So Chrissy, my apologies to you and your team. I don't do it. I'm too lazy to do it. So I find it far more effortless not to price match and just assume I got the best price in the first place. But one of the questions I get on the measurement of resolution in using callbacks is well said, Chrissy, is that it's not the agent's fault, right? So the customer called back. It wasn't the agent's fault that they called back, and so they shouldn't be penalized for it. And one of the things that we found in our research is that is true. There are a lot of callbacks that the rep could not have predicted, could not have controlled. But what you also find is that over time, the better reps drive fewer callbacks than the worse reps. And so it tends to normalize. Now, again, it makes us all look worse than first contact resolution rates, but it is a more realistic perspective. The other catch here, when you're looking at measuring repeat contacts or callbacks, is to determine the callback window. And so we do a lot of work on this at Tether. We built a recontact model and worked with a number of companies on this where, again, now you don't have to ask the question at the end of the call. We can tell you, matching up calls with phone numbers and then looking at time windows, what percentage of the time what you tend to see is like a peak and then a steep drop off at a certain window. And it varies by company and industry. So for instance, financial services, the callback happened really quickly because if I got a credit on my account or there's a fraudulent charge, I can go on my app, my banking app, or my credit card website, issuer's website, and I should see that reflected in a pretty short order, right? 24, 48 hours. Now, things that are more on a monthly billing cycle, by the way, cable and mobile, no surprise, very, very spiky in terms of those callbacks happen really quickly because people want their internet and their phones to work. And you can tell right away if it's not. Things that happen where the callback window might be measured more in a 30-day time horizon might be things like utilities or services that are more a monthly billing cycle. Those are the kinds of things that you shouldn't expect. You shouldn't expect all those callbacks to happen in the first 24, 48 hours. They might happen across 30 days. And so we certainly find that as well. But again, with modern technology, you can figure out what is that callback window. Then what I would say is if you're going to measure callbacks, do it within that window, right? So and then you're kind of eliminating those those callbacks which had nothing to do with the first call, and they're literally just the customer calling back about a totally different issue. But if you determine based on large data sets and a large sample, here's the typical callback window, then measuring callbacks and holding reps accountable for callbacks that happen in that window is much more likely it had to do with the first call than it had to do with something totally different. Not 100%, but again, you find that over time it balances out. The better reps drive fewer callbacks than the worst performing reps. So that's one I find that people kind of get hung up on a little bit, and I think a lot of that is, it's not a lot. It's not different from other CX metrics, but it's first contact resolution is a metric we can be proud of, and we can brag about, and it makes us look good. So.
Matt, there's a question in the chat, and there are a few comments, but I'll throw one out from Cheryl Smith that asks about your perspective on, you take into account calls that agents make back to customers, right? So being a bit more proactive rather than reactive.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Cheryl. And I think that's one of those things that is much more commonplace today than it was when we wrote the book, is that, we had, I don't know how many members we had in the customer contact council at CEB whose agents didn't have the technology to do that, right? They couldn't place those outbound calls. So we didn't measure that actually in our study. I just want to be totally above board there. So it's hard for me to say with data, but I would say kind of intuitively, I think that customers, and I'd be curious what book club audience thinks, but I would think that a customer penalizes us less for that callback. There was another comment, I think it was from Brett earlier about, Brett brought up the shipping issues, right? Missed delivery, things like that. One of the things we know that is a great way to avoid downstream callbacks is expectations management, right? Under the old axiom of under promise, over deliver, and even more to the point, giving customers a very clear, if it doesn't show up on your doorstep by this date, or if you haven't gotten the tracking number, or if you don't see the refund on your account by this time, then call us, right? But it's going to take this amount it typically takes this amount of time, even if you're buying a little bit of buffer there. That won't avoid all of those callbacks, but the customer, a big chunk of those customers will know, okay, this is not going to appear on my statement for a week, or week to 10 days. So I'm not going to call back till day 11 in most cases. And Brett, this is difficult, I think, right now, given supply chain issues and shipping wonkiness and madness right now. But managing expectations in a way that I had this issue just recently with my outdoor grill. I had to order a replacement part under warranty. I ordered it in early October. I was told it was going to arrive by the end of October, which I was like dumbfounded by. But then I looked at a satellite picture of all those ships in like the LA harbor, and I was like, okay, it's probably out there somewhere. And so I was, okay, fine, it's gonna. So then I got to November 2nd or 3rd, and I called back, and they were like, well, those shipping dates are flexible, and it looks like it's now like mid-November or even end of November. I was like, you could have, to Chrissy's point, you could have let me know. Oh no, sorry, that was Cheryl. You could have let me know, right? You could have been proactive and alerted me that, or even better yet, manage those expectations up front. Hey, we hope it's by end of October, but I do want to warn you, given what's going on, these dates are very flexible. It's possible it might not be till middle of November, even end of November. We will let you know if that's the case. that would have avoided a callback for me and a lot of frustration on my part.
The other thing I'd add there, and I think unfortunately there are exceptions to every rule, right? Everyone's probably got an example of their own. I myself a couple of years ago bought a new washer dryer. If anyone's done this recently, most companies that you buy a washer dryer from, they outsource their delivery.
Yeah.
And so if there's a problem and you call customer service, there's an issue with that's not my problem, right? So you're calling for help and like, well, it's out of our hands because we're not the delivery company. And there's a whole issue. There are certain parts that weren't delivered. And no kidding, the delivery folks were far more helpful than the company I bought it from. And there was a time when someone proactively did reach out, which I appreciated, saying, hey, did they wind up delivering when they said? Well, yes. But unfortunately, when you and I spoke a week ago, what you didn't tell me is that I needed 2 more parts. So yes, they came, but it was an incomplete installation because of that. And so I think for me, where it gets, I don't know if complex is the right word, Matt, but there are layers here, and it is tough to cover everything. But the idea that I don't know whether empowering is the right word, but the ability to empower your agents to be able to say, hey, look, yes, you're doing X. Let me just give you a sense of what happens next, right? And maybe this is a good segue into the next slide here. But the ability to say, hey, look, yeah, we're going to solve this now, but here are a handful of things that usually go wrong with someone who buys this washer dryer.
And our reps are, so many of them are under the handle time, device, right? So or thumb. And so they don't take that extra time to, even if they know it, right? And most of our reps do. They know, I'm pretty sure that X, Y, or Z might go wrong with this customer's request or issue or the on our path to resolution. Like, I know this stuff's going on. I know why you're going to call back and get mad at me. And I could forewarn you about that, but I got to get off the call and get on to the next one. So, and that's always we're going to talk about this idea of forward resolution, next issue avoidance here on the next slide. But before we do that, let me say 2 things. This is I think the issue many companies have with this idea, which we're going to talk about in a moment, is the incremental handle time to take the extra time to forward resolve the next issue on this call. And obviously that's a math problem, right? If you're forestalling or deflecting a high enough percentage of callbacks by taking that extra time on the initial call, then you're likely paying for it, right? Or it pays for itself. The other thing, though, is to keep in mind that as we'll talk about I think the second to last session, we'll be talking about frontline control and some of the research around controllers. This idea of demonstrating subject matter expertise, giving your customer the sense that they are talking to somebody who just knows their stuff and knows these issues and these problems better than the customer. Despite all the customer's research on YouTube and Google and the blogosphere and on Twitter and TikTok about how to solve this problem, this rep knows their stuff and they know what they're talking about. That idea of taking a little bit of extra time gives our reps that opportunity to demonstrate their authority and their source of authority and their expertise in a way that instills confidence in our customers as well. So just avoiding those downstream callbacks tells a big part of the story, but doesn't tell the complete story. One thing I would, so Roberta had a question here about disposition codes. Great question, Roberta. I think, disposition codes, I feel like are, in many respects, one of those places where a really good customer experience insight goes to die. And what I mean by that is, most of us, we know in our contact center that we have a disposition code menu of, 40 possible issues that customers call in about, and with many flavors of them. And it comes as no surprise probably when we run the analytics, and we do this all the time at Tether. We ask companies for their disposition code data, and we just want to see what are the issue types that drive the highest number of calls. And what we find is it's the first 3 or 4 disposition codes and the other category that get all the hits. And the reason is, again, your reps are too busy with their, getting on the next call, doing their post-call work, that they just quickly, it's easier to just click this catch-all category, other, or just grab one of the first few disposition codes. And so that data is very, very circumspect. When we run analytics on call data, what we find is, interestingly, most calls contain multiple issues. And most disposition code menus only allow the agent to tag 1 issue. And by the way, if we do allow them to tag 2 or 3, they typically don't take the time to do it, or at least not very accurately. And so we find that there are many, many of these issues, Roberta, to your point, where like a single disposition code doesn't capture, it might capture the issue, but doesn't capture the entire context or the entire event. this is where like machines are actually much better than people at understanding all of the reasons that were wrapped up in that call. And we talk about the case from a Canadian wireless provider in the book. And I think there are only a handful of them, so you can probably guess which one it is. But in that book, they did this the hard way. They had a team of analysts, business analysts, pour through data from systems, operational systems, try to understand what are the issues that drive what downstream issues. Like what is the unhappy family tree of these issues, and how do they all co-present? And so that gave them the sense, I think, Roberta, or insight into, issue A is actually kind of related to issue C. They tend to co-present. Customers are calling about issue A on the same call, ask about issue C, or they call back within 48 hours about issue C. It's a commonly occurring downstream issue. So again, you could do it the low-tech way like they did, or you could do it more of a high-tech way. But without further ado, let's talk about this idea of downstream issues and next issue avoidance. I'm going to go to this story, which I'm having a total mental lapse here, Scott. Do I tell this story in the book, and should I tell it?
I don't think it's in the book.
I don't think
I do think it's when you present, you share, but I don't think it's in the book.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. Good. Then it should be surprising to everyone. So, some of you.
I tell it a lot, so people on the line might have heard it.
Well, if Scott,
I do give you credit though. I definitely, I definitely give you credit.
Well, this is a story you don't want to take credit for, because it was me being a total idiot. So, I Dyson vacuum cleaner. I think we all know what this is. Some of you may have one at home, or certainly you've seen them, right? Fancy vacuum cleaners. And I learned the hard way a number of years ago that the Dyson is priced like it's made of gold, but it's actually just made of plastic. And so I hit the leg of my dining room table, and a piece popped off the side. And when that happened, it rendered my vacuum cleaner not just unproductive, but counterproductive. Because what would happen is, it's not that it lost suction; it would still pull in all the dirt from like my rug or from my floor, but then it would spray it all over the room. And so it was a total shipment of fail. And so what I did was, because this is what all the guys on book club can attest to, the first thing you reach for is the roll of duct tape, and you try to duct tape it back on, because that's what guys do. The second thing is that if you have it, you go with the super glue option and the duct tape. And what I found was neither of those solutions worked. It actually, there's so much pressure against this part that the dirt continued to like spray out of like little tiny crevices that I hadn't fully sealed. And so I broke down, I called Dyson. The rep I got was definitely a controller, wonderful, deep subject matter expert, newer stuff. She asked me 2 questions that got her, of all the Dyson vacuum cleaners and all the years and makes and models, exactly to the one that was mine. She's like, type this URL in. This is the model you have. Does that look like yours? I said, yeah, this one's a different color, but that's mine. She said, perfect. And then she took me to the exploded diagram page that shows how, all the parts fit together, and for that specific model. And very quickly, and this is less than a minute into the call, she said, okay, you need, part 21J, it's the dust filter cover. And I said, okay, awesome. I'll order that part. Here's my credit card, et cetera, because it was way out of warranty. And besides, I broke it. That's being dumb, apparently is not covered by the Dyson warranty, which was my problem. So, or careless, I should say. And so that was really interesting. Now, what I always tell people is, if she had asked me in that moment, have I fully resolved your issue today? I would have said, absolutely. In fact, not only that, but send me to that survey, because this was such an efficient, wonderful experience, and you did a great job. But the call took an interesting turn. She kind of paused, and she said, before she asked me if she fully resolved my issue today, she said, you know what, I'm going to send you 2 of those. And I said, whoa, hold on a second. I don't want to pay for 2. There's only one on the vacuum cleaner. If there are 2, I only broke the one, not both of them. She said, no, there's only one. But I'm just thinking about other customers I know who've had this issue. And I got to tell you, that part is not the easiest to install. You may have noticed this, but there are these little plastic pins and tabs around the perimeter of this part. And when you go to install it, and she said, no offense, guys tend to do this a lot. They force it on there, they get frustrated, they force it on. And if you break any of those pins or tabs, you're back to the duct tape and super glue solution, which you've already figured out doesn't work. And then you're calling us back for another one. And then your vacuum cleaner's out of commission, not for 1 week, but for 2 weeks. And so she said, I'd rather just send you 2 now, so that you have a backup in case you get it wrong on the first go round. And if you get it right, it's on us. Just throw it in the spare parts bin. And it was at that moment I said, hold on a second. That's crazy. Like, this must cost you guys a lot of money to be giving away parts like that. And then she said, have I fully resolved your issue today? I was like, no. You don't understand. I'm a service nerd. I write books about this stuff. I love this stuff. Why are you giving away spare parts? Like, you don't know that I'm going to screw it up. And she said, well, honestly, and I was like, that's got to cost Dyson a lot of money. She said, honestly, it happens a lot more often than you would think. They need to redesign that part, but they haven't yet. It's an older model, and I think the newer models have easier to install parts. This one does not, and it's a problem we see a lot. And so, better to send you two now. And I was like, yeah, but it's expensive, right? And she said, actually, the phone call costs more than the part. So, all things being equal, I'd rather send you two now. That way, you don't have to call us back, which is expensive for us, and it's really frustrating for you. So you see what happened there was that she didn't just solve the issue I called in about, she forward resolved the issue I might call back about. Now that's a really powerful concept. And I think where people sometimes get hung up is, I think they'd like that idea, but where they get stuck a little bit is, what is that issue in my business? What are the things that cause a lot of downstream issues for us? And a few ways to solve it. Again, low tech, high tech. So low tech first. We call this the 6-pack of beer and pizza exercise. This is maybe in the pre-COVID days. But one great way to solve this is to get your really tenured agents in a conference room, buy them lunch, have them stay a little bit after work, and whiteboard it. And what you'll find is that your tenured folks are a font of information and perspective and wisdom around, hey, if you had a little bit more time, what are some of those issues customers call about where you would, like Scott was saying, you might warn them about those additional parts they might want to buy so their washing machine actually works when it gets delivered, or where you might be able to solve a downstream issue that happens all the time. Because these folks have been around long enough that they probably do this anyway, even without permission, because they're so efficient on the other parts of the call and they're so fast. They have that little bit of buffer, they can do that. And they're also often cleaning up for the other reps who don't take the time to do that. And they see this stuff all the time. And that's a great way to go figure it out, is the pizza and beer. The other way to figure it out, again, is using modern technology and machine learning. As I said, we've done this for a number of companies. I'll give you another example. We did this for an insurance company. And one of it turns out, some of you guys I don't know if we have any insurers on the line, any auto insurers. But in auto insurance, and some of you may know this, you may actually use this product. Most auto insurers, the big ones, have a telematics option now. And telematics is that app on your phone that monitors whether you're driving safely, and you can earn discounts and things like that, safe driver discounts. This is still a pretty new technology that has so-so adoption amongst customers, but it's really good for customers and it's really good for the insurers. And by the way, it feeds them tons more data to inform their actuarial model. So it's really, really valuable data, really valuable stuff. What we found in this insurance case is that a huge percentage of their callbacks were about telematics. And when we did the analysis, we found that when customers call about telematics, they typically ask about one of 5 different questions. And they're things like, how do I install it? How do I sign up? What kind of discounts am I eligible for? If I speed, are you going to call the cops on me? Like, the privacy question, stuff like that. Like, these are real questions, right? My question, by the way, as an aside, is that I signed up for telematics, but my teenage son has not, and he keeps claiming he hasn't gotten the email, which I know is bogus. So, that's a family. It's a little autobiographical for you, but nevertheless. So customers, it turns out, have they call about one of 5 different issues, but the reps have been trained in this company to answer the question the customer calls about. So when the customer calls up and they ask, how do I get started? How do I sign up? I answer that question. But what I don't take the time to tell them is how the rebates are going to appear and how you earn those. And by the way, to assure them of the privacy. And so what this company has done, and they found that on average, when customers get enrolled for telematics, it takes like 3.5 phone calls to fully resolve all the issues that they have. Oftentimes what happens is they sign up for it and they go tell their neighbor, and the neighbor's like, oh really? Are they gonna tell the cops that you always speed down the street? Because I see you speeding down the street all the time. These are things that occur to customers later. So what they've done now is they've literally given their reps like a cheat sheet. Whenever a customer calls about telematics, irrespective of what their question is, answer these other questions too. You are permissioned to take as much time as you need to fully address the issue. And so again, lots of different ways we can think about it. By the way, also something we can do digitally, right, through chat. We have an example, I think, from Fidelity as well. which does this through self-service. Customer calls in and changes their address, for instance. There are a number of life events that might drive an address change, a new home, perhaps, moving, retiring, buying a bigger house because you had a child, any number of things. And so that's a great opportunity for Fidelity to reach out with some of those other, in their case, upsell, cross-sell offers, but other ways they can help, because address changes are highly associated with other life events. So anyway, Scott, let me stop talking. Examples that you have or that you've seen?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that come to mind. One is, when I talk about next issue avoidance and I share this story, the question that I get is, well, it sounds like that was a tenured rep and she knew what she was doing. What do I do with my new hires? And so you beat me to the punch a little bit with the beer and pizza example and in your tech example, because to me, that's a perfect opportunity to, again, go to those tenured reps and then bring that information back to your new hires and share that with them. And you can start them off at a pace, but there's an ability to share that knowledge. And that's where my mind goes, because that's probably the number one question I get around next issue avoidance, for sure.
Yeah, you're right. And this is true. This is true in around lots of things. It's going to be true as well around experience engineering. We're going to talk about next time. And Scott, this is something you guys live every day, right? You're working with large organizations who have a spectrum of very tenured and experienced, reps, all the way down to people who are just in seat for a few weeks. And so, how do you teach these more nuanced skills, right? These experience engineering skills. Next issue avoidance, you're right. It's one of those things that our experienced reps, they just get it. They just know, because they've seen it all before. And for our less experienced reps, different ways we can do it. In a low tech way, of course, laminated card saying customer calls about this issue, answer these 5 questions, irrespective of which question they actually called in about. And if you need to say, hey, did you have any questions about the privacy issues? Because I find a lot of customers have these questions or concerns. Do you know how the rebates are accrued? Do you want me to walk you through that? These kinds of give the customer might say, no, I read about it, I'm good. Nope, I know you're not going to rat me out to the cops, so I'm cool there. And fine, we don't need to talk about it, right?
I was going to say, this does bring us back to the metrics conversation. You mentioned hail time a second ago, and I think this is probably a good segue into that. We're running a little bit low on time. I know everyone wants to talk metrics. The last piece that I'll mention, because I see it in the chat, there's some conversation around, hey, opportunities to be an advisor, right? For the rep to serve as a consultant or an advisor. And I think that's 100% correct. And it reminds me of some work we did ages ago at CEB around the drivers of revenue or retention or something along those lines in customer service interactions. And you might recall it, you've alluded to it a little bit earlier. You alluded to it a little bit earlier. I can actually see the chart where it was, hey, look, when it comes to loyalty, here's what you get if you provide indifferent service. Here's what you get when you're willing and capable of helping. Here's what you get when you're reducing effort. And then, oh, by the way, then there's the learning part or the education part.
Yeah.
And the ability to forward resolve, the ability to say, hey, look, Matt, I'm going to send you this piece, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to send you a second one because people like you break it all the time, and I don't need you calling me back because that's expensive for us and high effort for you. That education piece goes a really, really long way, and I think it helps create that trusted advisor status in a short amount of time. But it does bring up the whole metrics and handle time issue and alignment there.
By the way, the advisor thing, I think what we're going to find later is there's a lot of co-presentation of this idea of being an advisor with that controller research, which again, we'll talk about in a few weeks' time. We'll get to that one. I would say there's a couple of other questions. By the way, great point, Mark, about this idea of teaming and partnering with your less experienced and more experienced reps. That's a fantastic suggestion. If you guys are monitoring the chat here. Cheryl and Hugo both hit on this idea. Hugo's asking about AI helping with next issue avoidance for sure. I have just a quick point I want to make on that one. Knowledge articles, absolutely, Cheryl. That's another great resource. Let me combine maybe an answer or perspective on both of those, Cheryl and Hugo's comments here. The one thing I think what is in vogue right now is using AI to. I wouldn't saying replace the rep is not the right way to put it, but it's almost like replace or supplant the rep's judgment. And so you see a lot of systems, and I'm not poking at any given vendor out there, but they're really focused on telling the rep in the moment that the customer's upset or that the rep is needs to slow down their pace or boost their enthusiasm or whatever it is. And what we found is, and again, we'll talk about this a little bit later around frontline control, those things we hear from reps when we talk to them around focus groups, we survey them, they send them a message that management doesn't trust them. They don't trust their judgment. So I need a machine here to tell me that the customer's screaming at me. Like, I get it. I'm the one being screamed at. And so what I like about Hugo and Cheryl, your suggestions here is, I'm going to borrow a phrase from Callie Field, who is the head of customer care, head chief customer officer at T-Mobile, and wrote an article about T-Mobile. We will talk about that in a few weeks, reinventing customer service. But one of the things she said, we talked about AI, and she said, at T-Mobile, we believe in hiring great people and letting them use their judgment. We also believe in technology, right? And we believe in AI and the power of that technology. How they come together is like this. What we don't want is AI telling the rep what to say and do, what to upsell, what to cross-sell, that the customer's upset, that you're not being, smiling through the phone, whatever it is. What we do like is the idea of AI as sort of like Jarvis to Iron Man. So the machine that helps, the computer that helps Iron Man with figuring all kinds of things out, getting a suit ready and his rockets and all these kinds of things, and giving them the exact distance to places. Like their view is the technology should be there to support the rep. And so there are lots of opportunities. One, she said, Cheryl, your point, and Hugo, yours as well. If we can pick up during a conversation that a customer's asking about something in particular, why not use AI to go fetch that knowledge article and serve it up for the rep so the rep doesn't have to waste time going to find it? Again, Jarvis to Iron Man. And that's a powerful notion, I think. It's not about AI supplanting the rep or replacing the rep's judgment. It's about AI helping the rep be more productive and actually play the role of an advisor. Even for our less tenured people, imagine that being served up these knowledge articles in real time that make it seem to the customer like, boy, you must have worked in this organization for 20 years. It's like, no, I actually been here for 20 days, but I've got this really powerful system helping me seem like an expert to my customers. So anyway, I'll stop, get off my soapbox on that one, but that is a personal point of view of, powerful technology, got to be careful how we use it, and next issue avoidance is a really great application for it if done in the right way.
Matt, I know we're going to miss out on metrics. Maybe we'll pick that up in early December when we, when we meet again in a couple of weeks. I want to keep everyone on their schedule today and be respectful of that. I'll let you address Mark's last question about getting him a flight suit. You guys can deal with that offline, maybe.
I wouldn't try flying in it though, Mark. That's
It's about 2:00 Eastern. Want to get you guys on to your next meeting. Thank you as always for joining us. Any questions that pop up, like Matt said, after we log off, please send them Matt's way, my way. We'll do our best to incorporate them a couple weeks from now. And again, any questions that you just want to discuss between now and then, give us a shout as well. And final shameless plug, like us on LinkedIn if you can. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah, happy holidays, everyone. Take care.